Thunder Cave, Chapter 20, page 160. I waited until Sepit was asleep. Then I slipped out through the crevice and climbed to the top of the kopje. In the distance, I saw the headlights of a poacher's truck heading away from us, back towards the camp. To the east, the sky was beginning to lighten. Sepit wanted to leave while it was still dark in order to get a head start on the poachers, but I was almost certain they'd call off the search. They were more interested in elephants than they were in me. I wanted to give Sepit more time to rest, so I sat on top of the boulder a little longer. After what I'd seen Sepit do in the camp, I had no doubt that he could make it rain whether he was blind or sighted. If it wasn't for me, Sepit would have already been at that cave. I climbed down the boulder and squeezed through the opening. Sepit was still asleep. I gently shook him. "We've got to go," I whispered. "The poachers are gone." He sat up slowly. "Are you sure?" "I saw them driving back to camp." "Good." "How do you want to do this?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "I should be able to tell where you are by listening," he said. "But out in the open, I will put my hand on your shoulder and you will guide me." "How do I find the cave?" "You will have to tell me what you see," he said, "and I will guide you. First, go back to the escarpment road." We left the hiding place and very carefully climbed down the kopje. At the bottom, we headed west across the open bush towards the road. Sepit had his hand on my shoulder and adjusted his pace to mine. I promised myself that no matter what happened, I would get him to the cave safely. The long rains were more important than finding my father. When we reached the escarpment road, I stopped. "Which way?" "South." He raised his face toward the sky. "I feel the sun. It's just coming up." Both of his eyes were badly swollen. As we followed the road south, I told him what I was seeing. Periodically, I glanced behind, looking for dust from the poachers' trucks. I still didn't believe that they'd come after us, but I kept my eyes open for places we could hide just in case. "Soon we will come to a dry stream bed coming down from the hills," Sepit said. "From there, we'll turn west and follow the stream up to the hills." About a mile later, I saw it. "The stream bed is just ahead." I led him over to it. We started to climb. "On the other side of this hill will be a narrow valley." When we got to the top, I saw it. The flat savanna valley was only a few hundred yards away. On the other side was another hill, roughly the same height as the hill we were standing on. Both hills were covered with thick brush and trees. I told Sepit what I saw. "Good, take me down into the valley." It was difficult walking down the steep, brushy hillside, and we were both grateful when we reached the valley floor. "Walk north," Sepit said, "until you see a large grove of yellow fever trees on the right." I led him along the base of the west hill until I saw the grove. "We're at the grove," I said. "Take me through it." We walked through the grove, and when we came through the other side, I knew where we were. It was the same place I'd seen in my dream. In front of us stood a gigantic bow of trees surrounded by a huge pile of stones. I noticed something I hadn't noticed in the dream. The grass around the stone was green, as if it had been regularly watered. I hadn't seen green grass since I left New York. "I know where the cave is," I said. "Then you see the Boab?" "It's hard to miss," I said, and added quietly, "and I've been here before." Sepit smiled and said, "Take me to the Boab." When we got there, Sepit kneeled and felt the stones. "This is where Lumia is buried," he said. "Lumia?" Sepit sat down. "A great man," he said. "When he was a small boy, a Maasai warrior found him alone in the bush. The only thing he had with him was a magical box called an Enkiduang. The warrior took him back to his family, and they discovered that he could foretell the future, and that he knew a secret water place. He became the first Laban of the Maasai, and that Ekidang was passed down to each Laban in his line. I looked down at the green grass. Is this where Lumia found water? Pete felt the grass and smiled. It could be, he said, but in the story, the place isn't specified. How long has he been buried here? How many stones do you see? I look around. Hundreds, maybe more. Well, Sepit said, the only person allowed to place a stone on Lumia's grave is another Laban, and very few of them have ever been here. In other words, I said, Lumia has been here for a very long time. Sepit nodded. What happened to the magical box? I asked. Satanic destroyed it. What? I couldn't believe it. Why would he do that? Sepit laughed. He said he got tired of carrying it around with him, so he took the contents and made this necklace, and the rest he put into a small pouch. You mean the bones and the necklace are Lumia's magic Ekidang? Correct. What kind of magic? I will spend the rest of my life finding that out. Sepit stood up. I need your help. Anything, I said. He reached out and felt my shoulders, then dropped to his knees in front of me. He then drew his knife from the sheath behind his shuka and handed it to me. I need you to shave my head, he said. Use a little water and try not to cut me. Go slowly. I took the gourd from his shoulder and poured a small amount of water over his head and very carefully began scraping off his hair. When I was finished, I dried his head with my t-shirt. He raised his head. How does it look? Slick, I said. He laughed. Good. Now go to the green grass and dig until you reach mud and bring a handful to me. I dug under the soft grass and in no time reached moist, reddish clay. I scooped out a double handful and watched as water filled the hole where the mud had been. Water wouldn't be a problem here, I thought. Then I realized that there was something strange about this place. Look at the white space, Jake. Sometimes it's the things we can't see and don't hear that are the most important. I looked around. The place was like an oasis in the middle of a desert. It should have been swarming with animals, but I didn't hear or see a single one. I brought the mud over to where Sepit was sitting. There were no animals here, I said. I know, Sepit said. I wondered how long it would take you to notice. Satanic said that only special animals come here. Why? There's water, green grass. He didn't say. What did he mean by special animals? I don't know. I looked around again and felt very uncomfortable. When I came to Africa, I was nervous about encountering animals in the wild. Now I was uneasy about not encountering them. What kind of place was this? Do you have the mud? Yes, I said, still holding it in my cupped hands. Good. I want you to put a thin coat on my face and neck. I knelt in front of him and began to smear mud on his shaved head and worked my way down. When I got to his eyelids, I hesitated. They were still badly swollen, and I didn't want to hurt him. On the eyes, too, Sepit said. I continued spreading the mud on his eyelids, very, very gently. He winced in pain, and I stopped. I can't, Sepit. You must, he said. You're doing fine. I continued, but I wasn't very happy about it. I took a step back and looked at my handiwork. How does it look? Very handsome, I said. Thank you, he said. Now find a stone for me to put on the pile. I jogged over to the yellow fever trees, found a stone, and brought it back. Sepit held the stone in both hands and said a few words, then very gently placed it on the pile. As soon as he removed his hand, he fell over backward and his body began to shake violently. I rushed over and put my arms around him, trying to help. The convulsions grew worse and shook my entire body. then stopped as suddenly as they had begun. "What happened?" I asked. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said, sitting up slowly. He felt the stones on Lumia's grave. Satanic heads died. "Oh," I said, feeling the grief I'd felt when my mother died welling up inside me. "I don't know what to say, Sepit. I'm very sorry." Tears spilled from his swollen eyes. He will be missed. Sepit sat for several minutes with his head bowed, then got to his feet. "Please take me to the cave," he said quietly. "It is time." I stood, and he put his hand on my shoulder. We walked past the Boab to the beginning of the path. "We're at the path leading to the cave," I said. "It's very steep." It was also wide, a good 10 feet across, and it was well worn, as if it were heavily traveled. I wonder who had made it. Sepit put his hand on my shoulder, and we started up. It didn't take me long to figure out why the path was so worn. Elephant dung was strewn all over it, and some of the piles looked relatively fresh. I'd say elephants use this path pretty regularly. "Africa's perfect path builders," Sepit said. "They are fueled by grass, know the easiest way between 2 points, manufacture their own replacements, and live for a long time." All good points, I thought, but I was more interested in why they hadn't turned the grass around on the Boab into mud wallow. I asked Sepit what he thought about this. "Perhaps Lumia keeps them away," he said. "It is said that he was buried standing up, so he could continue to see all around him." "Do you think there are elephants in the cave?" I asked. "We'll know soon." A couple of minutes later, we stood outside the cave entrance. I looked at the petroglyphs on the outside wall. Aside from the snake eating its tail, there were many others. One depicted a group of warriors hunting a herd of animals. Another looked like clouds with giant black thunderbolts coming out of them. A cool, damp breeze came from the opening, and with its unmistakable musky odor of elephants. The entrance was more than large enough for an elephant to pass through. I peered into the darkness, but could only see about 10 feet inside. "I don't see any elephants," I said. "And I don't hear any," Sepit said. "Shall we go in?" "I guess." Once inside, I stood for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. It was cold. I felt like I had just stepped into an air-conditioned warehouse. I heard the echo of trickling water and was surprised to see a good-sized pool in the center of the cave. This could explain why the elephants hadn't turned Lumia's grave into a wallow, but it didn't explain why there weren't hundreds of animals around here. Sepit took a deep breath and said, "Salt. The cave has salt in it." He reached down and scooped up a handful of reddish dirt and tasted it. I did the same. He was right. The elephants come here for salt. Perhaps it is their reward for maintaining the path. "What do you see?" I looked up. The ceiling was at least 40 feet above us. "It's huge," I said. "There should be a small passage." I looked around and saw darker areas that had to be tunnels. But from where I was, I couldn't tell how deep they were. "There are several," I said. "One of them should have a light coming from it." I strained my eyes to see and thought I saw a small amount of light coming from a tunnel on the wall in front of us. As we walked towards it, the light grew brighter. We stopped outside the opening, and I looked down at the narrow passage. "This must be it," I said, "but it's going to be a tight fit. We'll have to crawl." "I'll go first and check it out." I slid into the tunnel and wormed my way down the long passage. The tunnel led to a good-sized cavern that surprisingly was as cold as a refrigerator. Water trickled down the far wall, spilling into another pool of water, much similar than the pool in the main cave. The light came from the opening in the top of the ceiling. The walls around the cavern were decorated with hundreds of ancient petroglyphs depicting animals and people. Above them were billowing clouds with rain falling.